Okay, let's dive into something really quite unsettling today. We're going to tell and sort of unpack this a remarkable personal account that a listener shared with us.
Yeah, it's a story that really weaves together some strange occurrences, deep beliefs, and, well, moments that are just hard to explain easily. It's all centered around one family's experience, specifically with their grandmother.
Right, and this isn't like a typical source for us, is it? It's not research or history in the usual sense.
No, exactly. It's a first-hand narrative shared originally on a YouTube channel. It details this series of, peculiar events over several years, events that seem to get stranger and stranger, leading right up to the grandmother's death.
So our mission here is really just to follow the thread of this story as it was told. We want to pull out the key moments, try to understand the timeline, and how the family themselves interpreted these, well, frankly, bizarre events.
We'll be looking at reported changes in behavior, these unexplained physical shifts.
Yeah, and rituals, potential rituals, and these really potent beliefs that seem to drive the narrative.
It takes some very unexpected turns, so yeah, get ready.
Okay, so where does it start? The account actually begins not with one big dramatic thing, but more with childhood observations.
That's right. The granddaughter, who's called Nooch in the story, she remembers her grandmother having, let's say, unusual practices even way back then.
Like the altar. The source describes this specific altar in the house.
And what's really notable, as you said, is that it wasn't your standard Buddhist altar.
No.
It seemed dedicated to other kinds of objects. The narrator speculates they might have been related to figures like Kumen Thong or Luk Krok.
For those listening who might not know, what are those generally associated with?
Well, they're figures often linked to specific spiritual practices in some traditions, sometimes for things like wealth or protection, but they often exist kind of outside mainstream Buddhist worship, sometimes connected more with, folk magic or maybe even the occult.
Okay, but the story makes a point of saying that despite these practices, the grandmother wasn't overtly scary back then.
Yeah.
She didn't seem to have obvious supernatural powers or anything.
Not at this stage, no. Life seemed pretty normal on the surface. The strangeness was more in the background, The unusual altar, the sense that the grandmother was, as the source puts it, involved with things.
Yeah, involved with things.
Yeah.
Like maybe knowing about or practicing some kind of folk magic.
Possibly. But it wasn't disrupting daily life or causing fear, at least not in Nookie's earliest memories.
Got it. So then, as time goes on, the grandmother's health starts to decline, which is, a natural part of aging.
Right. And the source mentions she eventually needed a wheelchair to get around. She couldn't walk independently anymore.
And that detail's actually pretty crucial, isn't it? Because it sets up her physical condition before the really strange stuff starts.
Absolutely. It establishes she was physically dependent, needed care, and the practical setup was she'd alternate stays, sometimes with Nooch's aunt in Lampang, other times with Nooch's mother in Uttaradit, wherever she could get the best care.
Okay, so now the story really shifts focus. We jump to a specific kind of pivotal event. Nooch is about 16, visiting her aunt in Lampang.
And this is where the truly unexplained stuff seems to kick off.
What happens?
Well, the source describes this group of unfamiliar people arriving at the aunt's house, maybe 3 or 4 of them, and they were all dressed in white clothes.
Strangers, not family friends.
Nooch didn't recognize them. She initially thought maybe they were friends, but something about their conversation just felt off, not like a normal visit.
And didn't she overhear a specific phrase? Something that stuck with her even though she didn't get it at the time?
Yes, Rad Khan, that's the phrase. She heard them using it. And because Khan can mean bowl in Thai, she thought of literal bowls.
But the context suggests something else entirely.
Yeah, exactly. Later interpretation, especially by the narrator, suggests it likely referred to a ceremony, maybe involving spirits or entities, like to receive the Khan in a symbolic or spiritual way, not physical bowls.
Because right after this conversation, these people in white took the grandmother outside, still in her wheelchair.
They went to an open area near the house. The source is specific. It mentions a stone bench area, and they started performing some kind of ritual there with the grandmother.
And Nooch just watched this. Didn't understand.
Watched from a distance, yeah. Didn't grasp the specifics. Just saw this mysterious ceremony. The grandmother, the people in white, this outdoor space, all happening right after hearing Rob Khan. It felt connected somehow to the grandmother's earlier involvement with things.
Okay, and then just 3 days later, 3 days after this ritual, something really shocking happened.
Yeah, the story goes that a neighbor came rushing over to the house, just completely stunned.
Why? What did the neighbor see?
The grandmother, the one who hadn't walked in years. She was walking.
Wait, walking?
Yeah.
After being completely reliant on the wheelchair.
That's exactly what the neighbor reported seeing. They saw her walking, described her as sort of dragging her feet a bit, but moving on her own, heading towards that same stone bench area where the ritual happened, and then towards the neighbor's house.
Wow. The neighbor must have been bewildered.
Understandably, knowing her condition. So, Nuck and her aunt hear this, and they immediately run inside to check on the grandmother.
Did they see it too?
Yes, the source is very clear. They saw the grandmother get up from her bed and walk around the room by herself, still dragging her feet a little, but definitely mobile, independent of the wheelchair.
Okay, that's the first huge unexplained shift then. A sudden, almost miraculous recovery of mobility just days after this strange ritual.
And the source absolutely links those two events. Within the story's logic, the ritual is presented as the direct cause, the catalyst for this sudden physical change.
So what happens next? Does she stay mobile?
Well, the story continues that after regaining this ability, the grandmother could walk around normally for a while.
Okay.
She could move freely again. And during this period, the aunt decides to take her for merit making, to a well-known temple in Lampang, maybe seeking a blessing or just a normal activity now. She could walk. Nutch didn't go along this time.
Right, but when they got back from the temple,
Yep.
things changed again, didn't they?
Yeah, another really strange incident. The grandmother, who had walked perfectly fine to the car and gotten in by herself to go to the temple. When they arrived back home, she refused to get out of the car. Or rather, she couldn't.
Couldn't. What happened?
The aunt tried to help her, but the source describes the grandmother just having this strange look on her face, and her legs simply wouldn't move. She couldn't get out.
So she just lost the ability to walk again. Right there.
Instantly. And the narrative states that from that exact moment, she was back in the wheelchair full time. She never regained the ability to walk again after that temple visit.
Wow. Okay, so a temporary unexplained recovery, followed by a sudden, equally unexplained loss. And the story connects that loss specifically to the temple visit.
That's the interpretation offered in the source material, yeah. The narrator suggests that maybe the holiness, the spiritual energy of the temple somehow expelled whatever it was that had entered her, whatever had allowed her to walk after the Rabkan ritual.
Like one spiritual force counteracting another.
That's how it's presented, yes. A kind of spiritual conflict playing out.
Okay, the story then jumps forward again, doesn't it? About 4 years.
Yeah, about 4 years. Nooch is 20 now, and the grandmother's overall health has gotten significantly worse.
So she moves again.
She returns to Uttaradit, this time to live with Nooch's mother. Nooch, her dad, her brother, they were all working in Bangkok. So Nooch's mother becomes the primary caregiver, often alone with her.
And this is where the story gets particularly disturbing, isn't it? Some really chilling accounts from the mother.
Yes. Deeply unsettling events. The source recounts one specific incident that really stands out.
What was it?
The mother was changing the grandmother's diaper, and the source adds this detail that it happened to be during the mother's menstrual period.
Okay.
And while she was doing this, the grandmother apparently fixed this incredibly intense, unblinking stare on her, a gaze the mother felt was just not like her usual self at all.
Just staring.
And then it got really bizarre. The grandmother opened her mouth and licked her lips, and the mother described seeing her tongue, saying it looked blackish or, very dark colored.
Oh, wow. That's deeply creepy.
It terrified the mother. The source really captures her fear. She apparently cried out, kept calling her grandmother Yai Ram, begging her to stop, saying, "I'm scared, I'm scared." It was clearly profoundly frightening.
I can only imagine. What did she do?
Her reaction was just, finish the task as fast as possible, get out of the room, and immediately call a junior coworker to come and stay the night with her. She was too afraid to be alone in the house with the grandmother after that.
Understandable. Was that the only time it happened?
No. And this is where it gets even more specific and strange. The source says the exact same thing. The intense stare, the dark tongue licking the lips, happened again when the coworker tried to feed the grandmother.
The coworker she called over.
Yes. And the source states the coworker also happened to be on her menstrual period at that time.
Whoa, okay. So the mother started suspecting a direct link between these disturbing actions and the caregiver's menstrual cycles.
Exactly. That's the conclusion the mother reached, according to the narrative, which, resonates with certain kinds of folk beliefs where specific entities are thought to be drawn to or react strongly to blood or certain bodily states.
Right. So naturally, the mother is freaked out. What does she do? Does she seek help?
She does. Deeply concerned, she goes to a monk at a temple to explain what's been happening.
And what did the monk advise?
Well, after hearing about the strange behaviors, the monk gave her something described as consecrated bearskin. Like bearskin that had been blessed or enchanted for a spiritual purpose.
Bearskin, what was she supposed to do with it?
The monk told her to use it as a test. The instruction was to place this bearskin under the grandmother's pillow.
A test for what?
The idea was, if the grandmother reacted badly, strangely, negatively to the bearskin, it would indicate that the person, the consciousness in the body, wasn't truly the grandmother herself anymore, that something else was inhabiting her. It was a test for presence, essentially.
Okay. So the mother decides to do it.
Yes. Nervously, according to the source, she secretly put the bear skin under the pillow that night. Apparently, she even sewed it into the pillowcase lining to hide it properly. She thought, it's just a test, maybe confirms her fears, but wouldn't cause actual harm.
But it wasn't harmless, was it?
No. The reaction was immediate and violent. The very moment the grandmother's head touched that pillow, she reacted intensely.
How? What did she do?
The source recounts her crying out, shouting things like, "Hot, what did you put under my pillow?"
Oh my God.
She physically struggled, desperately trying to lift the pillow or see what was under there, but she was too frail, too weak to manage it. She just kept crying out about this intense heat and pain coming from the pillow.
And the mother? What's she doing while this is happening?
She had to pretend she had no idea what was wrong, asking, "What's wrong, Mother? Are you okay? Should we go to the doctor?" All the while knowing, according to the monk's words, exactly what this reaction signified.
That must have been terrifying for her, too.
Absolutely. And the grandmother was insistent. She demanded a new pillow, refused to sleep on that one. The source really paints a picture of the mother's fear, changing the pillowcase, feeling the grandmother's intense, unwavering stare fixed on her the entire time, terrified she'd be found out or confronted by whatever was reacting.
This is building to something intense. This whole sequence leads directly to the final night, doesn't it? The night the grandmother died.
It does. The mother was alone in the house with her again. She reportedly heard these strange sounds coming from the grandmother's room, described as kak. Sounds like a rattling or struggling noise.
And she didn't go in right away.
She was too frightened, apparently. She waited.
Then what?
The sounds eventually stopped. Just silence. A heavy silence. And as the mother finally, cautiously, started walking towards the room to check, she began to hear something else.
What?
Owl sounds.
Okay, hours outside.
Well, yes, outside on the roof. But the source specifically says it also sounded like the owl sounds were coming from inside the grandmother's room itself.
Inside the room. That's significant, isn't it? In terms of folklore.
Hugely significant in many traditional beliefs. Owl sounds near a house, especially at night, and especially seemingly coming from within, are often seen as a powerful omen, usually signifying impending death or sometimes a strong spiritual presence.
So this just amps up the fear. The mother rushes into the room then.
Yes. Fueled by the silence, then the owls, she rushed in.
And she found her grandmother.
She found the grandmother's body. But it was the posture of the body that was so striking, so disturbing.
How was she positioned?
The source describes it very clearly. The grandmother was sitting bolt upright in bed, leaning against the headboard.
Sitting up.
Sitting up. And her hands, they were clasped together, resting neatly in her lap. The body was already stiff, rigor mortis setting in that precise position.
That's not how you'd expect someone to pass away peacefully in their sleep.
Not at all. It's a very unnatural, almost posed position.
So the mother called the hospital, medical staff came.
Right. They handled the situation, removed the body. But the granddaughter, Noach, who shared the story, she remembers her own feeling at that time. This profound sense of fear and this haunting question just echoing in her mind. If that wasn't Yai grandmother, who was it?
That feeling that something else had been there, maybe even in control, had really taken hold.
Deeply. The whole sequence of events had led her and her mother to that conclusion.
Okay, so let's step back a bit. How did the source, the narrator telling Nush's story, try to connect all these dots? How do they interpret this whole sequence?
Well, they definitely draw strong connections, that period where the grandmother could walk again. They link that directly back to the Rabkan ritual. The interpretation is that the ceremony was specifically to receive or summon some kind of entity or spirit into her body, and that entity temporarily gave her back her mobility.
And the loss of walking after the temple visit.
That's seen as the temple's holiness, its spiritual purity, acting as a counterforce. It basically expelled or drove out whatever had entered her during the ritual, one force canceling the other out.
Okay. And the later behaviors, the staring, the dark tongue, the violent reaction to the bare skin, those sounds before death.
All presented as further evidence, further confirmation that something else was inhabiting the grandmother's body, maybe struggling against the holy object or manifesting itself in those disturbing ways.
Did the narrator offer any specific ideas about what kind of entity it might have been?
Yes, they did offer a specific hypothesis drawn from folklore. The possibility it could have been a pop spirit.
A pop spirit. What is that associated with?
In some Southeast Asian folklore traditions, a pop is often described as a kind of malevolent, sometimes cannibalistic spirit that possesses a person. And critically, it's often believed to be the result of someone dabbling in black magic or witchcraft, playing with things, as the source put it earlier, and then losing control, with the magic turning back on them or their family.
So connecting it back to the grandmother's unusual practices from the very beginning.
Exactly. Suggesting maybe her early involvement with things had led to this later consequence. The narrator even reflects on this idea of negative consequences or karma associated with practicing these kinds of low magic forms, suggesting they often lead to difficult or unsettling ends.
And the sounds. Cook-like sounds before she died.
Interpreted potentially as the entity struggling within the body as death approached, or maybe the body's final, intense physical reaction to the consecrated bear skin still hidden in the pillow.
Which brings us to that final, eerie posture. Sitting upright, hands clasped.
The interpretation offered for that is quite chilling. It suggested it might have been a final act, perhaps the grandmother or the entity in the very last moments, attempting to pay respects or make some final acknowledgement to whatever forces or beings she had been involved with or worshipping throughout her life, linked back to her lifelong practices. A final ritualistic pose, almost.
Wow. Just, wow.
Yeah.
This account really does take you on a journey, doesn't it? Through this series of incredibly strange and, frankly, terrifying events, it builds from these subtle background things to dramatic physical changes, deeply disturbing encounters, and that final, really chilling scene.
It's such a powerful example of how personal experience and traditional belief systems can merge to interpret things that, science doesn't have an easy answer for. It really highlights the role of faith, maybe the power of suggestion within a specific cultural context, but also the profound impact of encounters that feel undeniably real, spiritual, or supernatural to the people going through them.
Yeah, this story definitely makes you pause and think, doesn't it? About how much we really understand or don't understand about the inner lives, the beliefs, the potential experiences of even the people closest to us. And maybe about those unseen forces that some belief systems propose are active in the world.
It certainly encourages you to consider possibilities that fall outside our everyday, conventional understanding of reality.
It really does. It makes you wonder, what subtle shifts or unexplained moments have you maybe brushed aside in your own life or seen in others? What parts of this particular story stand out most starkly to you?
It's definitely a lot to mull over.
It is. Join us next time as we take another deep dive into the fascinating stories and sources that you share with us.